I don't know how you did it. I know you're telling me how you did it, but I don't know how you did it.
The man likes his long takes.
Terrific.
But I was watching Gravity. I'm like, I feel like this would look as good if you made it today. I mean, do you feel that way as someone who actually made it?
Hey everybody, and welcome to the CineFix Top 100, our struggle to survive in orbit while we watch 100 of the greatest movies of all time. I'm Clint Gage. Joining me as always, CineFix's very own Hubble telescope, Alex Stedman. And
hello, just floating in space.
Just floating out there in space. And of course, the man who once appeared to me as a hallucination to offer his wisdom in a time of need, Michael Calabro. Guys, how we doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Very excited for today.
Awesome. Yes. So if this is your first time joining us here on the CineFix Top 100, two things. First, the Top 100 is a list born out of an unholy algorithm perpetrated by our producer, Dan. And he forces us to talk about these movies one at a time. And second, if this is your first time here, you're not alone, because we have a guest this week. Joining us is Academy Award-winning Visual Effects Supervisor, Tim Weber. Tim, thanks for being here, man.
Hello. Thank you. It's great. Very exciting to be here. We're very, per Alex's comment already, we're very excited to be talking with you too. Congratulations on 10 years worth of Gravity is the film we're here to discuss today. Yeah, it doesn't feel like 10 years, as always. These things seem to shoot by, but it felt like 10 years making it, but it doesn't feel like 10 years since.
Well, yeah, that was going to be my first question. Was it actually, has it been out longer than it took to make at this point? 10 years?
Yeah, it took 3 years really to make, pretty much. So yes, it has. But
okay, good.
There's lots of rumors floating around the internet about how long it took to make. It was essentially 3 years of proper production, which was still a while.
I saw one guess that it was 5,000 BC was how long it took to render the film.
Well, yes. We did calculate if we'd rendered the whole film, everything we rendered on one processor. It was around about 5,000 BC. It was the time that the pyramids were being built. We would have had to have started the render. Yeah, kicked it off. Yeah.
That honestly, it feels like it still would have been worth it. But let's dive straight into this movie. This is a film that I remember I saw in the theaters, and then I read a lot about how you guys made it, and then I went to see it again, kind of immediately after that. So the sheer amount of stuff you guys had to figure out to make this movie is remarkable.
An awful lot went into it in many, many ways. Whether it was the research that needed to be done to understand how things work in space, because we wanted Alfonso, and well, all of us wanted it to be as genuinely grounded in reality as possible. And, you can break that where you need to break it, but at least you try. The methods of making it, to the hard work that went into making it, developing new techniques and then achieving it. Yeah, it was a lot.
So anyway, we'll just dive straight into this. Is the first segment that we usually talk about here is the pedigree of this movie. Usually starting with the Academy Awards, this one got 10 nominations: Best Picture, Best Production Design, Best Actress were all nominated, and then Best Director, Cinematography, Editing, Score, Sound Editing, Sound Mixing, and of course Visual Effects were all wins. 7 out of 10 ain't bad. That's a good night at the Oscars.
I think you can safely say we all had a good night. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. There's a great picture of the table, and it wasn't set up, but we've got a photograph of the table that we were all sitting around having drinks afterwards, and it's lots of half-drunk drinks and a pile of Oscars sitting on the table from all the various people that won, and it was very good. I mean, a number of those wins were for teams, like the visual effect is a team and the sound is a team, and we all get an Oscar, so it looked like a lot more than 7 even. So it was nice. a good collection. Yeah, I do
like the image of a literal pile. Like they're not standing next to each other; they're just like sitting on it.
Yeah.
It's like that meme of like Adele and Beyonce with all their Grammys. That was basically Gravity. This Oscar cycle was so wild, because one of the reasons I have such a near and dear place in my heart for Gravity was this was like my first Oscar campaign that I covered as a professional. And I was so passionate about Gravity, and it is so fun when you get to cover when you get to cover the cycle, and there's like a movie that you're rooting for, and it was like and I felt like we were all kind of rooting for Gravity. But it's funny because Gravity was about my life for like 3 months because I was working at Variety magazine at the time. Tim, I can imagine your life was similar. Like that movie had a crazy campaign.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I'd been nominated before, but barely involved in the campaign at all because visual effects is not generally considered to be that essential a part of a campaign or the awards. It's not the most important award, but because the visual effects was at the heart of Gravity really, and it was very important, and I was a huge part of the campaign, and I had to go around to all the awards beforehand and appear at the parties and make sure we were building it up. And I had no idea what goes into a campaign, an Oscars campaign before, absolutely no concept. And the size and the scale of everything that happened, I was flying backwards and forwards to LA to be at these parties and things. It was hard work, very hard work. But it was fascinating. And yeah, it was 2 months of my life, I'd say, just on the campaign.
It's funny because I feel like sometimes you like kind of run out of things to talk about if you've been talking about the same movie for so many months. I feel like you probably never ran out of things to talk about when it comes to the VFX of this movie. We'll get into it, but I remember seeing it for the first time, and even then it's like kind of in my top 10 theatrical experiences, just seeing it in IMAX and what I would give to see it in IMAX again. But every time I watch it, and it doesn't matter how many making of featurettes I watch and how much I read, I just watch it like, I don't understand how you did it. I'm like, why does this exist? How does this exist? How did they do it? I just don't understand to this day.
Well, that's what we aim for, really. Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah.
We'll get into all of that in the brilliant moment section here in a second. But just to wrap up some more of this pedigree, I wanted to talk about a couple of the other big names on this movie. Alfonso Cuaron, obviously, the director, had prior to this, Y Tu Mama Tambien and The Prisoner of Azkaban. Children of Men was the one that he had done immediately prior to this, I think. But when did you start working with Alfonso on this?
On this,
in general. Let's go. This is the pedigree section, so go all the way back.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I worked on Children of Men with him. I was a tiny bit involved with the Harry Potter, but not in any way significantly. But I helped create the baby for Children of Men, which was a great experience, and another amazing film. I think I love Children of Men, and it was great working with him. So yeah, that led to him coming to me and to us when he had Gravity going. And then the way he came was he was still working on the script. They hadn't finished the script, him and his son who were writing it, but he wanted just to check that it was going to be as easy to make as he thought it was. So he came, and I just remember having a meeting with him. There was sort of three of us in a room, and he was just chatting through, telling us the story of the script, and 40 minutes telling us the story. And I was pretty much breathless at the end of that, let alone watching the movie. Already it was incredibly engaging and tense, and yeah, he felt it was going to be quite easy, and that we could just hang some actors in spacesuits against blue screen, and he was worried about making sure that the spaceships would look real enough to be believable. But then as we got more into it, we realized it was a little bit more challenging than that. There was a lot more to it, not least because of Alfonso's filmmaking style. The long shots and the language he likes to use made it way, way more complicated than any of us realized at that point.
It's funny because I remember reading somewhere that Gravity is, I think, 80% VFX. It sounds like it didn't start like that. It sounded like it kind of grew into that.
Well, there was a moment after a few months of talking about it, trying to work out how it was going to be made. There was a moment when we sort of gradually made the decision to essentially create most of the movie in CG. And just to film the faces, essentially, you know, I mean, it wasn't like a single decision that happened at one moment. It happened over a brief period of time. But yes, so to begin with, it was looking at all the different options and, you know, could we try and suspend people from wires? Could they move in a spacesuit suspended from wires and look like they were floating in space for 12 minutes continuously? Not really. So yeah, I sort of felt it needed to be largely CG, and Alfonso needed some persuading for very good reasons. No one had done anything that was that sort of needed to be that photo real. That was, you know, it's people call it a sci-fi. It's not really a sci-fi. It's a movie set in space. It's not set in the future. It hasn't got blue aliens. You know, Avatar had come out before, which was, hugely CG, but it was slightly fantastical. You know, Gravity is not fantastical, so it had to feel absolutely real. And apart from all the other complications, just trying to make CG that felt absolutely real, you know, he wasn't convinced that could be done. So we had to persuade him that could be done, basically.
So was like the impetus of this like always going to be like starting with like these like 10 to 20 minute long takes, and then it was just like how do we make the 20-minute long take? Or did it start with like, hey, this is the idea for the script, how do we think the best way to cover this is?
It started, it's hard to know at what stage it was clear in Alfonso's mind how long the takes were going to be, but I think it was from pretty early on. You know, he already liked his long takes. Children of Men, you know, the birth sequence that I worked on was,
the man likes his long takes.
He likes his long takes. Yeah. No, well, yeah. So I'm not quite sure where he decided it was going to go as extreme as it was. I think he was probably keeping it from us because otherwise we'd all run away screaming. But it was pretty early on. And actually the opening shot, which ended up being 12.5 minutes long, and the second shot, which is, I think, about 10 minutes long, were going to be one single continuous shot for a long time. We worked on it as if it was one single continuous shot for quite a while. So I think, yeah, quite early on.
Amazing. And I love that he thinks it's just like, hey, I have all this like script in space. I want to do it all in long shots. This is going to be no problem, right? We barely have to cut.
We can do this, right? I imagine at some point you guys keep telling him what's possible, and he's like, all right, well, might as well do the whole thing in one take, right? And you're like, well, wait a minute. I didn't say that. The other creative that I wanted to talk about was Emmanuel Lubezki. Because I feel like, you know, cinematography in a film like this that's so largely digital is the line gets murky in a hurry. But like, so I mean, and I just, in terms of his pedigree, looking at, I mean, just this list of directors that he's worked with, obviously Cuaron, he's done a bunch of work with him, but Terrence Malick and Alejandro Iñárritu, Mike Nichols, Tim Burton, Michael Mann, Coen Brothers, David O. Russell, like he even shot Reality Bites with Ben Stiller. Like the different styles and the number of different ways that he's gone about like shooting film and being a cinematographer is really insane. And I imagine like your working relationship with him was just another completely different way to go about being a DP for him, I would imagine.
Yes, we had to work much more closely together than you would normally work. You know, and one of the great things about Chivo, one of the many great things, is he was totally willing to embrace a different way of working, to light stuff in the computer. We designed all the lighting in the computer. Before we got on stage, we did a pre-light stage where we sort of designed it with him, and that's just a way he hadn't worked before, and he embraced it and he understood it, and he worked very closely with me. So it was a really fascinating and enjoyable experience, and I think a big part of the success of it all was how closely a lot of us had to work together in ways that we didn't normally, because it was a very different production method to normal. Everyone had to do things in different ways and engage with other departments in different ways. And I think working with Chivo was a real positive example of that, and a huge part of what made it work.
It's so cool. I mean, filmmaking has always been an insanely collaborative effort to begin with, but it feels like it was even more so on this movie. But so essentially, were you like building a digital grip truck basically for him to work with? Is that kind of like? We weren't. that's how I'm picturing it. Which
yeah, no, we weren't massively emulating sort of real world physical elements, but we were, we were working in some similar ways that you do, if you see what I mean. We wouldn't build a physical, but we were moving lightings. We'd create giant bounce cards in the sky in the computer, and as Alfonso says, actually one of the things that made Chivo so happy was it's the first time he could actually say, could you just move the sun a few thousand million kilometers round to the left of it, and it could happen. I'm so
happy. I'm so happy to hear that, because that's like the joke on set, right? It's like, could you stop moving the sun, please? We need about 10 more minutes.
yeah. Well, we did actually.
You literally moved the sun. Yeah. That's great.
Gotta admit one thing. Can't beat the view.
I mean, we've already talked about the opening shot a little bit, not in a ton of detail, but I mean, we can dive right in if we want. I feel like that's as good a place to start as any. Is this?
I mean, you have to.
Yeah.
It sets the whole premise of the movie.
It also was in all the trailers. That's what made me want to go see the movie, was like, because that's what like they advertised it with. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to go see this.
I think it was the shot of her unbuckling and flying away from the arm.
That was the poster,
yeah.
Which I had that poster of her just like tiny little speck in the night. Yeah.
One of the things I love about that first shot is not just how long it is, but how it contains so many different sort of elements of movie making, from establishing shots to just a normal dialogue scene to, sort of drama to action to, as you say, the spinning away. It's sort of every style almost is compressed into that one shot as a continuous take. I think I love that.
That's one of the things that I want to ask you about. When I was reading about how you guys made this movie, I keep on thinking about that. There's like that old Hitchcock saying that like movies are made in pre-production, and this is like very much feels like this, right? Where it's like, from reading about it, it's like not only did you guys do like pre-viz, but then there was like that tech viz, which I think is the part where they go through and light it all, right? Like, can you talk to me about like the importance of like blocking in that shot? Because to your point, it's like 12 minutes and it's going in and out of frames and stuff like that, and like the camera can't cut, so it has to move. So like, how did like you guys all work together to make sure that like that framing is always like visually appealing and always like motivated and stuff like that?
Yeah. Well, the previs was critical to it, and we spent months working on the previs. We prevised pretty much the whole movie, not quite, but pretty much. And for shots like that, it totally, to choreograph the action and the camera move and everything, to be able to go from an establishing shot to a close-up to a two-shot to a, the right way. You've got to edit with the camera, otherwise it would be very dull. So it all had to be choreographed perfectly. It was a lot of work. And then, as you say, we prevised it. And back then when you did previs, it was just grey, basic human-like shapes that you animated to work out the movement largely. But we then had to design the lighting as well, because the lighting would have to work and be continuous, and the camera was going everywhere. Not just everywhere it would go if you were shooting on a stage floor where you're kind of moving in 2 dimensions, because there's no up and there's no down. The camera's moving in 3 dimensions, the people are moving in 3 dimensions, they're upside down, they're spinning around. Everything's got to look great from whatever angle, so the pre-light was very important. And then once we'd previs the basic action, pre-lit it to make the lighting work at every beat of this shot, and then we did the tech viz, which was really about working out how we would shoot it, because we didn't shoot it as one single continuous take. There's some cheating joins going on.
Cheating in filmmaking? How dare you?
Yeah.
Get
I
out.
thought.
This interview is over.
Yeah, so we had to, so I sort of divided it up into sections, and then we worked out, we had a few different methods of shooting it, and we worked out which one would be appropriate for which moment.
And I'm curious about, when you look at all the time that you spent on this movie, how much of it do you think was spent on this opening sequence? Because I feel like this is maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, the most complex in the movie.
Yeah, well, as I said, we spent 3 years making the movie, and we spent 3 years making the opening sequence. It was the first shot that we started to work on, and it was the last shot that was finished. So it went on for the whole period. I mean, obviously, not necessarily a huge number of people working on it throughout, but yeah, it took the full 3 years to finish.
And I guess this question is going to sort of ask you to remember a meeting you had 13 years ago. But I'm curious about, like, when you're, you know, in talking to Cuaron about, you know, that when he was first describing the story, and this is going to be easy to shoot and we'll just hang people from the scene. Like, thinking about the challenges of realistically depicting zero gravity and doing it in a oneer and doing all of these things. Like, at what point? Because I guess where I'm getting to is I want to talk about the light box, not Sandy's cage.
Yeah.
Which I read was what you guys started nicknaming it. But so at what point did you realize you had to build stuff like that? Like that's the thing, because like I always love hearing about, like, well, we had a robot arm, you know, with the camera on it to, you know, there's but like at what point do you realize, like, we're gonna have to invent some stuff to make this movie?
I think the realization we had to invent some stuff to make it came pretty early. You know, the big first decision, which I've mentioned already, was the point where we decided everything would have to be CG apart from the faces. That was a key decision, and then from there we had to work out how we were going to film the faces. We also had to work out how we would render the CG and make it look believable, but we had to work out how we were going to film the faces in such a way that the actors could understand how they were performing, you know, in whatever, you know, what their environment was when they were performing, and where the lighting was moving in very complicated ways. Because if an actor is spinning around, we can't spin them in the studio. So we had to move the camera around them. We had to move them a bit, move the camera around them. But that meant they weren't moving in the way they would be, which meant we also had to spin the lights around them. So it was, you know, it was a gradual working out of stages. We started deciding it was going to be CG and we had to film the faces. There was then a suggestion from Christopher, the studio producer, who had come across car robots being used to film things. And we realized it was a great way to move the camera, and we realized we could also put the lights on it, and we could have 3 of these car robots programmed together and they could be moving in sync. So we get coordinated light movement and camera movement. And then we gradually realized that worked for some shots, but there were some where the lights had to move way too fast and the choreography was way too complicated. And we realized that you can move the light around, not by physically moving lights, but by having a giant TV screen, essentially, and moving the picture of the light around the giant TV screen. So that's how it led us to building the light box, essentially. You know, millions of, I think it was 1.8 million, if I remember correctly, individual LEDs, essentially, in a box all facing inwards, and we could just, you know, program how bright each LED was.
Amazing. So like you guys built the light box specifically for this, not like adapting it from something else, like, you know, like the robot arms. Because like you watch all this behind the scenes stuff now, and it's like this very much looks like these like proto volumes which they use to shoot like the Mandalorian, and they have like the big LED walls, and it's like here it is 10 years ago, you know, like doing all.
Yeah, in many ways, that is what it is, I'd say. You know, we would have, you know, we almost shot some shots where we used the light box as a background, but back then the resolution of the LED screens was not high enough and it was too blobby. It almost worked for some out of focus shots, but not quite, so we didn't in the end. But in many ways, sort of was the beginning of using stuff in that way. People had used some LED screens a little bit before, although actually I wasn't aware at the time. But it was the first time that it was used, properly for a sort of movie.
Amazing.
Yeah, and you came about that just sort of slowly tugging on this thread of solving problems as you go, I guess. Which is a wonderfully meta narrative for the actual movie too. That's great.
Well, I think our journey was quite similar to Rhinestone's. Yeah, just being hit in the face by another challenge. As soon as you solve one, some new field of debris comes flying. Yeah.
Every 90 minutes, something flew through your studio, and you're like,
I think that's what is so crazy to me about this movie, and I think why we should talk about it when we talk about the milestones in the modern VFX industry. Like, so much of this movie was not you guys adapting processes; it was you guys creating new processes. Like, you invented them for this movie.
I think that's true. Yeah, we did invent an awful lot of things. Given that we, or even if we didn't invent them, we pushed them on a lot further than they were before, with the car robot arms and the light box, certainly, and the 12-wire rig, another sort of, it was a tool used to puppeteer Sandra. Quite a few inventions and using new technologies to render the material. And we had to, it's, necessity is the mother of invention. We had to, because there was no other way to do it. So we did.
Let's get out of here.
Damn it!
I know what you mean.
Damn it.
I do want to move on to some of the smaller things that are in this, because I'm curious. It's the shot, for as technically brilliant as it is, just as a whole, like in its totality, is crazy. But like the thing that sells it for me are all these little moments. There's one tiny little moment where she's like brushing. There's like a cable kind of floating in her way, and then she brushes it away to continue working. And like that, building. What was the process like with building those moments into this big, is it easy to forget about those details when you're thinking about the scope of what you're trying to do?
There's a retainer in the frame.
Yeah, all of that stuff is incredible. Yeah.
They all just get added gradually as you're working on it. Someone said to me the other day, in fact, it was David Heyman. I think he was quoting someone else, but he said directing is a million very small decisions, directing a movie. And I think it's just generally true of filmmaking altogether. It's millions and millions of very small decisions that just add up and add up. And I know the moment you're talking about, and it's that little section is one of my favorites. It's like it's one of the parts of the movie where in many ways the least is happening, but the animator who worked on that section was a real talent, and the way he made things move, the way he made her gloves move and the circuit boards bounce as she pushed them in, and the little twitches she does, and the detail, the level of detail he put into it that made all those moments happen is what brings it to life. Yeah, it's what it just transforms it.
And it certainly shows too, because I mean that's we're floating around space in a 12.5-minute wonder. This is not a natural state of being for any of us to, like, there's no real frame of reference for it aside from like some NASA pictures you may or may not have seen. So it's those tiny little, like, that's the moment where it becomes relatable, right? Like that moment of like, I'm trying to do this thing and there's something in my way. Like those are the tiny little brilliant moments that I think really sell the thing, which, including, all of the stuff you guys did to accomplish this thing, to then just have somebody add that little, like, get out of my way, I'm working here kind of moment. Like in the interest of making it feel real and grounded and relatable, like that, those are the things that do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, to your point, like you even have that scene where like she loses the screw and then George Clooney kind of grabs it for her. But I also just I want to make sure the sound design in this whole sequence is also incredible. From them talking and it's almost, you can just barely hear them. This whole movie, it doesn't make space noisier than it needs to be, but the score is still appropriately really dramatic and kind of ominous when it needs to be.
Yeah, it was a challenge because you don't hear any sound in space, and that was very important to Alfonso, as I say, wherever he can be grounded in reality, he wants to be. Yeah,
it's on a title card at the start of the movie. It was just like, hey, you can't hear anything.
Yeah,
like, that wasn't an accident. You're not supposed to hear things.
Yeah, so he did. He used music, and in ways that made it give the same impact as sound where necessary, but also used the fact that you can hear in the spacesuits. You can hear when you're touching something. The sound gets transmitted through the physical touch of an object, and obviously the radios, to be able to build up enough sound and the different qualities of that sound. And the sound team, Glenn Fremantle, were tweaked it again. Attention to detail is what makes it really, and it just all builds up to be believable.
So they built that soundscape out of like the technical radio broadcasts of like echoes of a touch in a spacesuit kind of thing.
I mean, the ways they actually physically recreated it are probably so far away from what was actually happening up there. I mean, if you're talking about cheating in movie making, the sound effects guys, the Foley, do all sorts of bizarre things, don't they? So, but yeah, they made sure that when certain sounds were coming, if it was because she's touching something, so then she can hear something, that it had exactly the right sort of timbre that differentiated the different sounds.
Well, I like what you said earlier, Tim, about it's not science fiction. It's just a fictional tale, but it's science. One thing I noticed a lot in rewatching it too was I can't imagine how hard it must have been to keep the lighting correct, because you have the lighting on her helmet, but also the lighting on the Earth. Was that like kind of like something you had to fix a lot throughout production?
Yeah, the lighting was incredibly complicated because, as I mentioned before, it had to be able to rotate and spin around, so that was challenging enough. But it wasn't just the sunlight that has to do that. The lighting, there is, a huge amount of the light comes off the bounce off Earth, and the complexity of that, bits of the Earth are blue because they're sea, and bits are brown because it's the Sahara Desert, and bits are white because they're clouds. And the way that reflects on a human face, let alone in the visor, so we had to get all of that complexity in the light onto the faces. Otherwise, it would have looked like they were shot in a studio. It wouldn't look like they were really there. So we had to do that whilst we were shooting, and then that would have to move all over the place, which is why we tried attaching giant lights to the car robot arms, but they started to bump into things quite quickly, and that's why we ended up using the light box. And then we'd have to put it all on. It would have, what we shot on the faces would have to match the CG, and the visors were put in CG, and the lighting, the way the light bounced off the visors, and it all had to tie together so you'd see the reflection of the Earth in the right place for the light on their face, and it would be all in continuity over the whole shot. And
so
a lot of when I was watching picturing clumsy robots.
Yeah. Because like when I was watching the making of stuff, right? Like it's basically you guys are just taking their face, and even though that they have their like heads in a helmet, there's no glass or anything over their face. It's just like pure capture, and then all of that stuff is just added digitally.
Absolutely, yeah. We put sort of things that were vaguely like spacesuits on them and helmets on them, but that was just to cast the right shadow on the face. Or if Sandra puts her arm up like that, we had something white on her sleeve, so there'd be a little bit of bounce light off the sleeve. That's why all those elements were there, but none of it was used. Yeah, it was just the face that was used. Everything else was generated.
There's a performance thing too, probably.
Yeah, all that to just get the right lighting to bounce off the face.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it does have to be like that, and Chivo is incredibly pernickety about all of those details and getting it absolutely right. And
you know what the thing I like about all of this is like what's fascinating, right? Like there's so much now, like in today's like VFX, like in VFX talk, right, about like AI and like, you know, Peter Cushing and like Rogue One, like, you know, there's like the uncanny valley of it all where we're like, computers just can't quite do it. And what is so like fascinating about like this production is the lengths that you guys went to get the actual face, because that is the thing that you knew can't be faked. And I love it because it kind of echoes like this like philosophy of like 90s like action cinema, right? In like the early days of CGI and like Jurassic Park and stuff like that. Like they knew that it was a simpler time and computers can do a little bit, but they can't do everything. And where like all that genius comes from and is not just having the computer do it, but having the computer work on the fringes of the thing, because you know exactly what can't be faked. And that is like what I think is absolutely fascinating about all the problem solving you guys did to just make sure that like this part is absolutely real.
Absolutely. You used the right tool for the right job, and you know, computers then could not do faces sufficiently well enough, and you know, they struggle even now. I think if you had to do CG faces for the whole of Gravity, you'd fall into the uncanny valley throughout the movie. So it's about using the right thing for the right job, and generally that is doing everything real wherever you can possibly do it real. You know, one of the jobs of a visual effects supervisor is to do as little visual effects on a movie as you possibly can, is to find physical ways. And I grew up, you know, working on, you know, before CGI was possible, and having to try and do stuff practically, and you could do a little bit of compositing and joining images together. But so I love the challenge of how to come up with a physical solution that you can shoot, and how you can manipulate that to get more than just the physical solution, and then adding the CGI where that's the right tool, you know, just to finish it off.
Well, to your points, I feel like that's why the movie, not that 10 years ago was that long ago, but I feel like that's why it holds up so well. Because when I was rewatching it just a couple days ago, it had been a few years since I returned to it, and I was kind of curious. I was like, is it gonna like look a little dated? Because sometimes I even feel that way about Avatar, as stunning as it was. Sometimes I'll watch it, I'm like, if you made that today, you could do it better. And he basically did with Way of Water. But I was watching Gravity, and I'm like, I feel like this would look as good if you made it today. I mean, do you feel that way as someone who actually made it?
I hope that it does stand up. Yes, it's really hard to judge it myself. I hope that it does stand up. I mean, unquestionably we could do little elements better, but I hope that it generally felt real enough that the difference would be minor, not significant.
I guess the other half of that question, the other side of that one is do you see the seams at all when you watch it? You mentioned there's a couple things that maybe you could have done better, but like, is there anything that revisiting that, because it also is funny, like we're talking about a movie that's 10 years old, saying like, well, in those days, and it's like, well, nowadays we like it's not that long ago, right? But you know, is there anything that stands out to you?
There are elements, yeah. You know, there always is, and that's the curse of working on something like that. You watch it again, and all you can see are the things you wish you'd changed. You know, but they're not big. You know, they're small elements. Speaking
of small elements, I do think of like one of the things that I'm like totally fascinated about in this film, right, is the particle physics of it all. Like, so, you know, Clint was talking a lot about how like the nice small moment on when she's like working on the circuit boards and stuff like that, and like, you know, there's like these little animations and stuff to like really sell that reality. How like now, like when the shrapnel comes in, like hits the International Space Station, and like, yeah, like
that's that's next on my list to talk about. It's about 50 something minutes into the movie. The second time the shrapnel comes around is outrageous.
And like the mayhem erupts. Oh, yeah. How did you guys like work to find that balance between like, you know, traditionally and manually animated things, and then like the particle physics of just like shrapnel coming around? Because it's like little bits and pieces that fill up this entire frame, and I can't believe every one of those things is individually animated.
No, and that's the challenge. Yeah. So if you're talking about the moment, I think you are, where the ISS gets destroyed and she's floating around on the outside. Yeah, that was another massive challenge, because to coordinate all of that, to coordinate making sure the camera was in the right place to see the right destruction behind her, and the right place to understand her journey through that, and that everything was breaking up in the right way at the right time. It could neither be totally simulated, we couldn't just do a computer simulation, but we couldn't do an animation and craft it by hand. Neither of those would work. So we had to sort of use a bit of both, and bounce backwards and forwards between simulating a bit, then working out what you could do with the camera, and then working out how you could animate and move something around to change it, and then sort of on the basis of that re-simulating it and re-moving the camera, and it went through many iterations of everything going into it, and bouncing backwards and forwards between techniques, really.
I don't know how you did it. I know you're telling me how you did it, but I don't know how you did it. It's insane.
Because
that sequence where there's an explosion behind her, and stuff ripping through the parachutes too, like the liquid looking sort of cloth in zero gravity as shrapnel is tearing through it. Like, all of that was just incredible. Yeah,
weirdly, the parachute was one of the hardest bits to achieve, actually.
That's the thing I'm always interested about, because there's these massive things happening, and you're thinking, oh, I bet I know what the hardest part of that was. And it's like, no, it was the parachute in the background. That was
yeah, exactly.
I hate space.
I want to make sure we touch on this, which is the 3D conversion of this film. This 10 years ago, if we want to make 10 years ago feel like a long time, this was like the heyday of the 3D boom, which seems like a lifetime ago. And I personally am still a sucker for 3D movies. I like them a real lot. I think that it's a great cinematic experience. It's not as much in the home, but anyway, this is like one of my top 5 3D movies of this era, and I just remember sitting in there and just watching all of this happen in that 3D space, and just being genuinely impressed with it, and then finding out later that it was a conversion and not actually shot in stereoscope, and then that's just then it just took it to another level to me.
Yeah, I think what makes a movie really work in 3D or not is whether it's appropriate to be in 3D, as much as how it's made in 3D, I'd say. And this is the perfect movie to be in 3D. It's all about immersivity, if that's a word. It's all about immersion.
It is now. You invented the light box. You can invent a word. It's fine.
It's all about the immersivity, and 3D adds to the immersivity. It's long shots. 3D is much better in long shots. When you're cutting and editing around, 3D is often not as effective. In fact, you have to reduce the 3D sometimes in fast editing sequences because it's too disturbing. So it's an ideal movie for conversion to 3D. And also, I would say, whilst it was all shot flat, and the live action all had to be converted, we did render, the CGI was rendered stereo, so it was rendered twice. Oh. Not in every situation, but for a lot of it, we were able to render it twice.
So it's basically
it's a bit of a cheat.
It's basically just the faces were the only 2D element in this
Yeah, when she's in the capsules, that was completely converted, even the 3D. But yes, we were able to just convert the face and render the 3D around it. That required a bit of coordination as well to make sure that we were rendering in the right way for the conversion, because they're two separate processes and they had to be sort of tied together. That was a bit of a challenge. But yeah, it worked very effectively. Definitely. It's one of those, everyone says about every movie, oh, you've got to see it on the big screen. But there's no question with Gravity that you have got to see it on the big screen because it's about immersion. And really, ideally, you should see it in 3D. There's not many movies I'd say that about, but I think it's one that is.
So the ideal viewing experience of Gravity, is it big screen in 3D or big screen in 2D?
Big screen 3D, yeah. I think it is. And like I say, I wouldn't say that about many films, but Gravity, big screen in 3D.
The thing I'm always...
And if you watch it on the back of a seat on an aeroplane, that's just wrong. I've wanted to go and shake people when I'm walking down an aeroplane. I see them walking, don't do that.
Have you ever caught somebody watching Gravity on an airplane seat?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's incredible.
I've seen it. I thought you can't. You can't.
God.
Also, it's so scary. I don't know if I'd want to watch it on a plane. I was like,
Well, now
I don't want to be in the air while I watch Gravity.
I mean, the scarier part of that is thinking that maybe Tim Weber might sneak up behind me and be like, "What are you doing?"
I would just love to. I now have a picture in my mind of like the studio flying you all around for the Oscar campaign, so you could do your chats, and every time you have to hop on a plane, you're just like sitting there watching some guy watch Gravity on an airplane.
Well, the weirdest part about watching movies on airplanes is inevitably I end up watching more of the guy 2 rows in front of me, like through the seats. So like that's.
I'm always watching other people's TVs on the airplane way more than mine. I don't know what it is about that.
Yeah.
Well, to that point, too, not that Gravity was short of Oscars, but I do wonder if Gravity would have won Best Picture if you had to go to a theater to watch it, because the way that Academy votes work is they send out screeners. So I think a lot of people watched it on their TVs. That is not the ideal way to watch Gravity.
No.
Yeah.
Who knows how much difference that made. Yeah.
Well, we'll need to get with the studio and see if we can't get it back on big screens and in 3D so we can all watch it again.
I would pay a lot of money to see it on IMAX again in 2023.
Yeah.
Well, in London, they are about to put it back on in the IMAX in London, which is great for the 10-year anniversary.
Hell yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm taking my son to see it, who was too young to see it the first time, so I'm quite excited.
Oh, that's great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's cool. So there was one other thing that I want to talk about. I want to talk about little bits, in particular the fire extinguisher. Like, and it's kind of a narrative beat that gets sort of threaded throughout the movie. And I guess the question is sort of like, I just want to make sure, like, at what point was that entered into was it in script? Was it because, like, this fire extinguisher ends up becoming like a lifeline for her. And we're first introduced to it, like, we get the exposition of it. She tries to do the fire and it works like a propulsion system and like blows her back. And so at first it's another obstacle for her. She literally gets hit in the face with it. And then like she barely kind of gets it into the capsule with her. It kind of clangs around on the thing. And there's a lot of stress involved in this fire extinguisher. And she carries it with her. And it ends up being the thing that gets her to the Chinese space station, and it saves her life. And then there's a moment where she forgets, she grabs it at the last second. She's like, oh, wait, yeah, okay, now I'm ready, when she's got her fire extinguisher. So, in building this movie that is full of these elaborate oneers and everything being rendered so meticulously and built so thoroughly, like little through lines like that, like, I mean, were they in there the whole time? Did you get to the end and realize you needed to go back and add a little thing of stress, or?
No, I think that one was very much in there in the script. I'm trying to remember whether there were any little moments that were added as we went through, but I think, Alfonso has a lot in his mind from very early on, has planned a lot out, and that one was definitely planned, and I'm fairly sure all of those little moments were in there from script stage.
Yeah. I think it was just an incredible bit of, like, it's one of those bits of filmmaking that's like, well, see, that's how you do exposition. Like you show it to people and you explain it. You see what this fire extinguisher can do, and then when she does it later, you get it. And I
will say, and there's a lot of propulsion physics in. I don't know if that's a real term or if I'm making it up, but there's a lot of, because you have the jetpack with George Clooney earlier, and then you have her kind of pushing herself with the fire extinguisher. Like, how much did you have to learn about those kind of physics in order to do this right?
The immersivity of propulsion physics.
Yeah. Well, luckily I had studied physics at university. I'd say I studied theoretical physics, because in theory I was studying physics. In fact, I spent more time in the art school than the physics lab. But so I had a fairly good understanding of that sort of thing. But I had to do lectures for the animators in particular, particularly during previs when we were working out the sequences. I literally stood up with a whiteboard in front of them and explained how, zero gravity works, how propulsion physics works, and how the lack of air resistance affects things. Because when you're an animator, one of the hardest things to achieve when you're an animator is weight. It's to give people and things that are moving weight and make them feel like they've got weight. So it's in their blood. They've been trained over years to make sure things have weight, and suddenly that's exactly what they're not doing, or at least half the effective weight, has disappeared. And so it was quite a challenge for them to adapt. So yeah, we had little talks and discussions and lectures and talking through how those things would work. And also, actually, we used simulations. We did computer simulations. For example, with the jetpack, at one stage we made a device that was like a little mini computer game. You had a joystick, and you could imagine the joystick was controlling the jetpack of Kowalski as he flew across your screen, and you'd try and fly him across the screen. And then we had a rope, and we had Sandra on the other end, and we'd try and fly it across, and it was incredibly hard to achieve the path you were trying to achieve. But also we realized how when the lead astronaut, when the string got taut, the tether between them got taut, that it wouldn't just suddenly start dragging the astronaut who was being towed, that there would be a bounce effect, that you'd get to the
she gets yanked over and over.
She would bounce, he bounced back, and they bounce all over the place. And then that is something that Alfonso then, that's amazing, he wrote that into the script. We discovered it in the simulation. He went, oh, that's great. And it became, there was one scene where they're just bouncing all over the place and trying to get control, and it became quite an important element of their journey. Yeah.
Oh, I love that that's such a good detail that I actually didn't know about this movie, because it's just like every time she gets yanked, Sandra's just like, ugh, and you're just like, oh my God, I just feel so bad for her.
Yeah, I would like to picture those days in the ADR booth of Sandra Bullock and George Clooney just going, for like 2 hours to get the right.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of that.
Oh no, but I want to go back to the fire scene too, because this is one that really actually struck me on a rewatch more than I thought it would, because the rest of the movie is so out in the open, obviously in space, but the fire scene is different because it's so claustrophobic. Like suddenly you're in the vast nothingness, and then suddenly there's a fire coming towards you. Did that feel different for you to make as it did to watch?
It did, actually. It had very different challenges to being out in space. I mean, generally, being inside the space stations had a lot of different challenges. Not least, she didn't have a spacesuit on for most of it, which meant we couldn't hide behind the CG spacesuit. And the fire scene in particular, the lighting was quite complicated. Actually simulating the fire was quite a challenge at the time. And the choreography of the action, again, was very tricky. And there was one moment where we ended up, it wasn't working. There was two issues. One, I can't remember what it was, but something wasn't working about the way she was moving around and flying around. It just wasn't physically looking right. And at the same time, there was a feeling that when everyone had watched the whole movie, that scene was a bit too long anyway. And I remember sort of sitting there and thinking, I think there's a way around, we can solve both those problems in one go. And I sat there and I kind of worked it out in my head that we could join one bit onto another bit and have her spin round, too complicated to explain, but have her spin round and the camera spin round. And we used the footage of her in a way that was totally not intended, totally different to what we planned to shoot. But it came together and it worked. And we managed to cut out 20 seconds of the shot, and the physics of it worked, and it looked like, and the drama of it worked, and it all just came together. And that was one of my sort of proudest contributions to the film, really, is solving multiple problems in one go. So very, very tricky choreography, and very tricky, making the action sit together with the drama beats as well. Yeah,
I do like that space station sequence too. And again, it's one of I feel like I talk about the smaller things on this show more than I do the bigger things generally. But like the moment where a little droplet of water hits the camera, hits the lens, like when she's cruising through the space station. Again, it's those little things like, okay, this is starting to feel real again. Like, not that any of it isn't, but like you know what I mean. It's those little additions there.
Cuaron does that a lot, though. He does that in Children of Men, too. The kind of camera as the character. Like, that's a very Alfonso-ism, in my opinion.
Yeah, in fact, on Children of Men, there was, I think it was some blood got splattered on the lens when they were actually shooting.
Towards the beginning of that long take, too. I think there's blood on the lens for like 13 minutes or something.
It's on for a long time. And initially, it was, because it was there for real, initially it was removed digitally. And then everyone went, actually, I think it was better. Alfonso said, I think it was better with it.
Just leave it on.
People spent months painting it out. Actually put it back on.
Come on, Matt, talk to me. Tell me where you are. Give me your position.
I do also want to talk about, and this is, the scene where Kowalski shows back up. She's in I guess it's the Soyuz, the capsule at that point, and she's kind of given up, and then Kowalski shows back up, and they have that conversation, and that's another, and it's one I had to go back and double check, but that's another 10 something minutes around there worth of one take. So, and that's I think you mentioned it earlier. It's one of those quiet beats that it's that are just as important as anything. So, like, how important was that scene? Was that scene ever considered to be chopped up any more than that, or how important was that to get an emotional beat like that in a oneer as well?
I don't think it was really considered to be chopped up, actually. 10 years ago, I'm not sure I'm remembering correctly, but I think it was just that was one that was always a single shot. It was in many ways more challenging because there's less CGI in it. There's less places to hide any joins, so the joins had to be very carefully crafted and worked into it. And the performance obviously had to be incredible to, I mean, it wasn't quite all one take, but there were some very, very long takes in there. And it had to sell the story without the ability to use this take here. Well, I think we might have done a little bit of that, but, sort of the normal tricks you can do with editing to help the performance. So, that was one of Sandra's amazing, tour de force moments, I'd say.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there was 10 solid minutes of like talking to some random Scandinavian and then hallucinating, and then like it's a lot happens.
Yeah, it does.
And it's also funny because too, when he first opens the door, and I don't know why I specifically remember. I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, oh my God, she would get sucked out of the door. And then you quickly realize that it's obviously a dream sequence, but it's one of those moments that kind of like tricks you for half a second. But then it's like, oh, obviously he's dead, and this is how. Well,
I mean, all the work that had been done up until that point to ground the thing and to like, there's a trust that the movie has earned at that point to be like, what I'm watching is like trustworthy and realistic, and like the physics of what's happening on screen, like I can buy into because of all the work that's happened up in in the 70 whatever minutes that we've spent up until that point. So like, yeah, I don't mind her not getting sucked out of the door, even before I realized it was a hallucination, so.
I think that's true. It's a lot of filmmaking is about earning, something up to a point. There's another example of that when she first makes it back to the ISS, and there's the lovely sort of fetal moment where she's floating around as if she's in the womb of the airlock, and there's the sort of the tether, or the umbilical cord is like an umbilical cord, and it's quite a long shot, and it's a very beautiful moment in the film and a very emotional moment in the film. But there was a point where feedback was coming back from screenings at the studio that it was too long and it was too boring and we were losing the audience, and etc., and we need to shorten it and cut it. And I just remember Alfonso said, no, that's not the problem. It's not that shot that's the problem, and I'm not shortening that shot. That is incredible shot. What the problem is that we haven't earned it. We haven't got people breathless enough up to that point that they need to relax and enjoy that moment, and and take a deep breath. And so we worked on the tension and making the excitement bigger, and the drive and the tension bigger beforehand, and that's what made the difference. Yeah, it was earning that moment that we needed to do.
I love hearing that, because I feel like he's just such a confident director, and so he earns that, because I remember reading somewhere that like the studio also wanted more kind of scenes of like flashback. It's like, and he pushed back. It's like, no, it needs to be grounded in space. Ironically, it's just he knows exactly what he's doing.
He does, and he's very determined to get what he's doing. I mean, frankly, to get that movie to happen, space movies, when we made it, when he came, as I said, and told us the story in the meeting room before he'd even finished the script, at that point, all the studios were saying, we don't make space movies. Space movies bomb. They do terribly in the box office. We're not making a space movie. And it was a space movie with a female protagonist, which was pretty rare back then, and a female protagonist who was on her own for most of the movie. To get that movie made took so much determination, so much strength of vision, and not giving in to, oh, let's cut back down to the ground, let's do this, all of those sort of things to get it made the way it was made. Yeah, it's quite an achievement, I'd say. just that.
Yeah, I would agree.
A woman on her own in space. Lord knows it didn't work for Alien, so why can't it's?
What a flop that was.
What a waste of time that movie was. But you mentioned like we talked about earning it and sort of getting in her space in terms of like experiencing what she's going through and needing a breath of a chance to catch our breath the same way that she does in that moment. But like I wanted to talk to you too about, I think immediately prior to that moment, just before she does get in it, there's some first-person POV shots, and when there's one longer take in particular. So I wanted to know, number one, it's one of my favorite moments when Kowalski's floating away, and he turns his music on again. Like that's a moment that I'm just like, oh, like it's a long shot. You see him very tiny in the distance, and he's still talking. He's talking about how beautiful the Earth is, and then he turns his music on again, and he kind of floats away. And then pretty immediately after that, we cut to this really claustrophobic inside the mask first-person POV shot. So I wanted to know about the challenges of creating that first-person stuff as opposed to, the more traditional third-person camera angles.
There's nothing, as I said, the more you can shoot, the better on the whole. The more you can ground things in something physical, something real, an actor's actual performance, the better. When we were doing those, there was nothing. It was all animated
from scratch. Yeah.
Generated from scratch, yeah. Which has advantages. It meant we could change it, as I said later, when we had to build up the tension there. We had the flexibility to be able to change it. But the pressure on getting the details right so that it feels real is that much greater. The way things move, the way you see a hand grab, everything, it takes a lot more work to make a POV, to make it believable, to make it so that you can invest in those moments. It's quite hard to tell the story as well as what's happening to her, but it's also very intense when it's successful, because you really feel, you go through what she's going through. So it's very powerful when it works, but it was a lot harder.
Well, and particularly in light of that note that the studio gave about the sort of fetal position moment not being earned or that's cool.
Well, also I'm curious. I'm surprised that this movie didn't make more people nauseous, if that makes sense, because so much of it is like spinning around in space and being in Sandy's position. And she even says in the beginning, like, well, it's hard to keep down my lunch. And that's before she gets tossed around like a rag doll. Yeah. Was that a consideration for you guys to like make it like not super nauseating to watch when it comes to the actual, spinning around and that kind of stuff?
It was a bit of a concern. Yes, definitely. I'm not sure Alfonso changed anything on the, I think he wanted the impact to be great, but it was a slight worry as to, would some people just not be able to watch it, particularly in 3D? It adds to that effect. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, are there any other specific moments we want to talk about before we move on?
I just want to talk about the end, the when she's hurling to Earth and then actually gets to Earth and almost drowns. And I feel like that was the moment. It's like, is she really gonna drown? Like, get through all of that.
There was that leftover tension of just like, what next? You know, like, what is there?
Really?
Is there a shark gonna show up or something? Like.
But that whole sequence with again basically the entire spaceship falling to Earth, kind of like we were talking about earlier. There's so many little different bits and pieces that goes into that whole sequence. What do you remember from shooting that one?
Not which bit of the sequence are you asking about, really?
Where the entire it's all falling to Earth and that great score is like swelling.
So as she's coming down, as it's breaking
and it's
up,
burning
and all
up,
of that, that was a little bit more like traditional filmmaking, I'd say. It was a bit more like a normal movie because there was quite a few edits in there. We were cutting in and out. We weren't with her so much. It was a little bit more like a traditional movie, to try and. I mean, part of what I remember is how, we used a lot of technology, but one of the things I always love about filmmaking is when you do stuff with a rubber band and a piece of string as much as car assembly robots, and getting the shaking of the Sawyers and getting her feeling that, the vibrations, etc. was, the set was balanced on a few car inner tubes and there were grips out there shaking it frantically trying to do it. It's kind of
I think I came across some of that behind the scenes stuff of people just kind of jumping on the back of the set, like
yeah. But that's what works. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, that's great.
It was great. Yeah, I
love that was a part of making this movie as much as not as much because you only did it for the one thing, but like. It's such a kitchen sink approach. Like what do we need to do for this particular moment? And do we need to invent an entire new light rig, or do we need to just have like 4 dudes jump on the back of this set?
Yeah, there were plenty of other times where we went pretty basic. And,
that's great.
Basic as we could.
Oh, you're a clever son of a bitch, man.
Cal, was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to ask about, right? Like, so like we've just spent an hour and 10 minutes talking about how like meticulously planned this movie was and how things needed to be invented and stuff like that. But like one of my favorite parts about like filmmaking and things like that are like the happy accidents. So like I wanted to ask you, like what were some of the stuff that like wasn't planned but like serendipitous moments that like you couldn't have thought out that kind of like made it to the final cut, that like it's just like this just kind of happened, and it's cool it went down this way.
Interesting question. I'm going to have to think back. And I totally agree. Happy accidents are essential to filmmaking. And however carefully we planned it, we tried to make sure we had the fluidity and flexibility on set to allow for happy accidents, and certainly to allow for the actors to have the freedom to give the performance they needed to give. And that was one of the most challenging things about it, is having to stick within the tight limitations because of the long shots and how to make it work, but making sure there was enough freedom for happy accidents. Trying to think of some happy accidents that were in there.
I feel it might have come down to things like the studio note about the umbilical scene, just like stuff like that, to where you can really kind of diagnose other things.
And I've thought of another one. This wasn't on set. This was the day we were finishing the movie. We were, as I said, the first shot we worked on was the opening shot, and it was the last shot we finished, and we were showing it to Alfonso for the very last time. And he is such a stickler for detail, and he's never satisfied. He wants everything to be better. And we knew it was looking great, but we knew that, he'd find something to comment on.
God,
and
what did he ask for?
Well, so one of the things we do when you see a shot, when you've seen it 1,000 times, all you look for is these tiny little things that don't really matter. And one of the most important things is trying to keep a big picture view of it. And one of the ways we do that is the same trick that painters do, have done for hundreds of years, is you look at your painting in a mirror, you see it the other way around, you see it with fresh eyes, you can judge it for what it is. So sometimes we flip our shots around left to right so that you can look at it with a fresh eye. But of course, with gravity, because there's no up and down, we actually decided, hey, why don't we turn it upside down? And we'll show it to Alfonso that way. He'll see it with a fresh eye and he'll love it because it's great and it will all be fine and we'll have finished. So we did that and we showed it to him. And we were all saying, God, doesn't it look so good upside down? It's great. The first part of it is just works so fantastically upside down. And as I said with Alfonso, he's so determined, he knows what he wants, and he's willing to get it. And he said, we're going to do it upside down. So on the day that we'd supposedly finished the movie, and we couldn't just flip the whole shot because it had to turn over halfway because the second half didn't work upside down. But so we could flip the first half, we could leave the second half it was, and there was a couple of minutes in the middle where we had to slowly turn from one to another, and that meant completely re-rendering the shot, that bit of the shot, and redoing it. It's
another 5,000 years.
And it was another couple of months, I think. But he knew it would make a difference, and he'd managed to persuade the studio to give us the time and the money to do it, and it made a difference.
That's hilarious. That was. Did you guys have like martinis packed with you for the end of that screening or anything?
Pretty much. Oh, yeah.
That's great.
Well, I actually wanted to ask because I feel like, and I very much feel like it after this conversation, short of actually shooting the movie in space, it feels like Alfonso got every single thing that he saw in his vision in this movie. Is there literally anything that you guys had to be like, okay, I think we just have to compromise on this one and not have it in the movie? Or did he literally get everything?
No, there are lots of compromises. I'm trying to think of one now, but yeah, sometimes you have to compromise,
To your credit, I just feel like you guys solved every problem somehow in the most creative ways sometimes.
He has a great way of making you want to solve every possible problem.
Well, and it wound up being so tight too. Like, I mean, it's, what is it, 80, 84, 85 minutes when the credits roll, something like that. Like it's so tight and it's so breathlessly paced that, I guess the question would be like, was anything lost wholesale, or was it just nips and tucks to keep it moving at that pace?
Do there was one sort of significant sequence that we did a lot of work on that was lost because it needed to. It's very hard to nip and tuck because it's mostly continuous shots. So to get the pacing right generally had to be done in previs before we shot it. But there were some moments where we could, as I was saying, in the fire sequence, and then there was another one where one animator, I think, worked for months and months and months because it was hard. You couldn't share the work between different animators because it was continuous. And he worked for months and months and months on this one particular sequence, and that was all he did on the whole film. And then it got cut from the film. And it was a great sequence. It wasn't anything about how the sequence looked. It just the pacing of the movie had to be changed. Yeah.
Well, it wouldn't be a movie if somebody's hard work didn't end up going away forever.
Tyrannotoy. Nostrovia.
So what movie lists does this belong on? So it has shown, it was on our top 10 VFX innovations of the 21st century, which is one of the longer titles we've ever had for a movie list as well. But I think, it's deservedly so. Congrats on that, Tim. Very, to be honest, I don't know that I've ever actually talked to somebody that I've put on a movie list. I'm just now realizing that.
Really?
I don't know. Surely I have.
I think you have.
I had to. I'm certainly not for this long. So I'm very through the looking glass right now. Sound design wound up on our sound design list. Then of course, top 12. We did 12. We couldn't only pick 10. Top 12 long takes of all time. I guess that movie list needed to be longer than usual. I guess thematically speaking. The opening shot was on the list, as well as the car sequence from Children of Men. That one made it on there. But and I'm sure it's gotten a few more honorable mentions over the years, but those are the three main ones that it showed up on.
Honestly, on 3 lists is real good for us.
It's not bad.
That's more than most movie we discuss. I feel like
we've run into some movies on this show that haven't really shown up on any. But are there any other lists that this ought to show up on?
You could throw this on top 10 CGI.
Sure.
This is probably the cover image for like CGI.
Not that we have a list for this, but this is maybe my favorite Sandy Bullock movie. Hot take.
There you
It's
go.
a great role for her. Yeah.
It's a great one. Is it Miss Congeniality? I don't know.
I do love it. Yeah, I do love this.
I was going to say
She's had a lot of good movies. Okay.
Yeah, for your soft spot for Gravity, I have a soft spot for Speed. So
Yeah.
Oh, fair.
my parents bought me Speed on VHS for Christmas one year, and we rented it like the week before Christmas and watched it. And then on Christmas morning, I got a copy of Speed on VHS that had been taped back closed. And I was like, you guys bought me the movie and then opened it so we could watch it last week. Anyway,
That's really
so that's my Sandra Bullock.
You know, there's a guy that's trying to collect every VHS copy of Speed in existence.
I'll have to see if I still have mine somewhere. Maybe it's in an attic, one of my childhood homes. We talked a little bit about science fiction and how this movie relates to it, but frankly, like, this movie does not feel sci-fi to me. And Tim, I think that's a credit to the work you guys did in making it so grounded. Like, I don't want to put this on a sci-fi list.
I mean, it's not. It's all like real space stations that are floating above us in a non-shrapnel form right now.
It's just
It's a science movie.
It accidentally takes place in space, I think.
Yeah.
But that being said, there's a list that we haven't made yet that I would like to put it on: survival movies.
That's what I was going to say.
So
It's a great. I love a survival movie, and this is a great one.
Yeah, like, put it in there with, there's the Castaways and the Revenants and the 127 Hours. I think you would probably, Tim, the other way that we approach movie lists is it's not an actual ranking. It's just like we'll pick a topic and then break 10 different versions of that topic down. So we could, there's a horror wing of that too, that this could be right next to Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Green Room or something like that, Even something like Rambo. I'm getting excited about the top 10 survival movies.
I think that would be a good list. I would watch all the movies on that list. I love a survival movie.
Yeah.
Those movies where you just have to survive until dawn, kind of.
Yeah.
It's a whole subgenre. Anything else spring to mind? We don't
Ladies
have to.
in Space.
Ladies in Space.
I mean, there's not many.
It'd be a crime if we couldn't come up with 10 of them.
I think we could.
Yeah, they made a bunch of alien movies, so
Several.
that's at least 5. Okay. Well, I'll get to work on that top 10 survival movies list. I think that'll be great. I'll run it past you, Tim, before I put it into edit. Shall we move on to things you didn't know? Some TorF. It'll be
This one might be. We've never done this with someone who actually helped make the movie,
Yes.
so I don't know if there's anything I'm going to be able to trick Tim.
So we've taken to calling this segment TorF because at one point our producer Dan wrote T or F on a whiteboard and showed it to us in the middle of us taping one of these episodes. And it just looked like the word TorF. And we're like,
TorF.
what are you talking about? So typically Alex and our producer Tayo have some sort of trivia that we kind of frame in true or false. So this will be an interesting take on TorF.
Yeah.
Having you here to, I guess, confirm or deny or tell us that we were totally wrong about it, which is entirely possible.
And of course, often stories get told by the people that made the film, and I think that never happened. So there's a sort of grey area of true or false.
Yeah. And that grey area is
It-
called TorF.
Things do get exaggerated.
So let's get after it. What do we have, Alex?
Yeah. Okay. So some of these are like maybe we can get Tim on some of these because the first one's kind of just a small story detail. But Cal and Clint, true or false? In the International Space Station, when Dr. Stone finds out there is a fire, besides the notebook monitor displaying the warning shows 2 photos of the screenwriter, Jonas Cuaron, and his family. True or false?
I'm going to go with true.
Yeah, that feels like as good a place as any to work a cameo in. Like, how else are you going to cameo in space?
Also,
I'll
like
go
levels
true.
levels up the storytelling too. It's like, here's a person that just like lost their family. That feels like it fits.
That is true. You're correct.
I thought you were gonna tell me like, no, it's false. It's actually
it was his
his
dad or something. Yeah.
So Tim, did you ever see that actual picture, or did you have to create that digitally from scratch?
It was a real picture that we scanned in and put into the movie. I managed to get a picture of my family in there as well.
Oh, nice.
Not quite so noticeable, but
nice.
they're tucked in there somewhere. Yeah.
That's great. See, this is
That'd be fun when you
this
actually
is
take your
already
son to, yeah.
Yeah. There'll be. I've got a question for you at the end.
Oh, good. This is already the best TorF we've ever torped. So let's keep going.
I know. I feel like maybe we should have had Tim bring the TorF.
Yeah.
It might be more interesting.
Sounds like he's got at least one.
All right. True or false? The entire film was shot on digital cameras.
I'm gonna say false, because I feel like the Earth stuff was shot on film.
I'm gonna say true because you said false.
All right.
I got to give it to Cal. That's true, or that's false, and he got the extra credit. It was the closing sequence.
Yeah. Because
nice.
I think that does a good job of like juxtaposing the two different environments.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about the stuff that actually takes place on Earth. Yeah, okay. Yeah. No, I'm with you now. I thought you were talking about like every time we see Earth in the movie, it was shot on film. I'm like, that's not right.
Last one. Alfonso Cuaron was inspired by the film Marooned in 1969.
I mean, aren't we
He was
all?
not inspired in
He was inspired
1969.
in 1969.
No, that's what
by
I'm clarifying.
Film,
The
or
1969
the film
film
was made in 1969.
The 1969 film Marooned.
I guess if he was, I'm going to have to include that on my survival movies movie list. Sure, true.
I'm gonna go false.
Tim, do you know this one?
I believe it's true.
It's true. Yep. Yep. He saw it as a child, and he said it was very well researched, and they really took seriously the realistic approach, which obviously you see in Gravity.
I thought you would have been like, no, it's Robin and Crusoe on Mars. That's what it's like.
No, but that is TorF.
Tim, you said you had a question for us?
Well, I think the answer is going to be quite easy. But who is the only other human character that appears in the flesh in the movie rather than a CG character visually? Who plays?
There is like a famous name that is like in the credits, and I looked this up yesterday.
Because
not the voice.
It's not Ed Harris. Although I did
Ed Harris, that was the name.
I did want to ask if Ed Harris was an Apollo 13 nod, because just hearing like he is the voice of NASA. I feel like in my brain, and so like
he is the voice of NASA. It just meant you knew exactly what was going on the second you heard his voice, didn't you?
It's some of that like shorthand based on our collective pop culture knowledge, kind of.
Yeah.
And the guy that like in the beginning, so it was like a 3-man mission, and the first guy that dies to just establish the stakes, and you see his face with the hole through it. That he was not. That's all.
He's CG.
Was it the frozen woman in the Jaws sort of jump scare moment?
There are two people in there, but they're both dead, so they don't count.
It's not the frog that swims past the camera at the end, because we're talking about people.
I feel like this shouldn't be hard, but it's really hard.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
So there is a little face that waves at the window where Kowalski is talking to someone in the cockpit of
space shuttle.
Like,
we're talking like right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning, the space shuttle, and someone waves at Kowalski, and that's me. I filmed myself. I got myself in the movie.
That is a proper TorF right there. That's good to know.
That's incredible. I love that.
Well, that's a wonderful TorF to end on. So let's move real quick next to our next topic. I think we can all. This is the MVP of the movie. Who's the MVP of this movie? I think we can all. I think we can all agree. So like on the count of, we'll go 1, 2, 3, and then name the MVP. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Tim.
Tim.
That's definitely a first that we've actually gotten to talk to our collective film MVP for one of these. But I mean, honestly, like we've talked so much about it. Like this movie doesn't it doesn't hit the same without all of the crazy shit you guys pulled off, frankly. So
it's very kind of you, but I think it has to be Alfonso. I'm sorry.
He does deserve. He gets a lot of it.
I'll give him a close second, but you know.
Yeah. And Sandra was amazing, I have to say. If you knew what she had to go through, sort of, you know, the complexities of hitting her three-dimensional marks as she was being suspended in weird positions from wires, and still give an emotional performance, you know, incredible.
Well, I mean, listen, any of the 7 Academy Award that got handed out, you know, they're all in the running, but. Yeah.
Also, I feel like it is an underappreciated Clooney role. Not that he's like going totally out of character, but I feel like not a lot of people could be that kind of calm presence as well as he could have been.
This is peak Clooney, right? He's in this
it's
movie.
Peak Clooney,
He's in this movie for what, 5 minutes, and all he is just George Clooneying in a spacesuit, and it just the effortless charm that is just exude in that performance over a radio. Like, you don't even see his face most of the time. He's just like, hey, chill out, haha. Like, let me tell you about this time, like this memory of Mardi Gras. It's amazing.
I don't think that gets him the MVP, but he was great.
Yeah, I just want to mention him.
Yeah, no, he adds a lot of charm.
I had to give it to Clooney.
He does. Good Clooney. Well, let's move on to Cal. We got time for one last segment.
This
one's gonna be tricky.
This might be the hardest version of this segment. So I am a big fan of Nicolas Cage, and I believe that Nicolas Cage has been in many bad movies and many great movies, but no movie is worse because Nicolas Cage is in it. So my question is, if this movie was made with Nick Cage and a Nicolas Cage of any era, what role would that be, and what era of Nicolas Cage are we talking about here? I mean, let's be real. I'll start it off. Let's be real. I think all he could really do is Kowalski, and I'm putting it like early 90s, you know, like Moonstruck to, you know...
National Treasure Nick Cage. The Rock Nick Cage, maybe.
And Rock Nick Cage is too serious. I think it's
He's a little nerdy in that one too, but
yeah, he doesn't have the charm.
I mean, look, either way, this is the only time anybody will suggest swapping 1-for-1 Nicolas Cage and George Clooney. Like, I don't think that's ever happened before, and it might have never happened.
I'm blanking on the title of the David Lynch movie he made with Laura Dern. Why am I?
Wild at Heart?
Wild at Heart. Yeah, I think Wild at Heart Nicolas Cage is as close of a Nicolas Cage as you can get to pulling off Kowalski.
But it wouldn't be better.
It would
That's part of this question.
I agree. This is Clooney is excellent at this.
What about as the voice of Mission Control, a slightly mad Nicolas Cage, not quite sure what's going on down there?
Well, yeah, like or the guy she contacts, or who like has the howling dog. It would be really funny if that was randomly Nicolas Cage.
Oh God! What if it was actually Nicolas Cage that he's just playing around on his ham radio?
Nicolas Cage would have a ham radio too.
Yeah.
He would.
I mean, that would be like Matt Damon in Interstellar levels of taking me out of the movie. If she's like, is this Nick Cage? Like that. That would have been wild. I suppose he could have been the guy that Kowalski sees in the little window at the beginning, but that, you know, we can't replace him.
Yeah.
I do think it'd be a little funny if he was the guy who was killed in the first 15 minutes, because they could say he was in the movie, he could do the press tour, and then you see more of the inside of his face than the actual face.
I don't think that makes it better, though.
No,
I agree.
No, I don't. Yeah.
So good. We confirmed that the movie's not that much better with Nicolas Cage. Tim, do you agree? Do you have any regrets about not having Nicolas Cage in this movie?
It's not in my top 10 of regrets about the movie. No.
Good. That's the thing that you notice that I was asking about earlier. Like every time you watch this, if we just had Nicolas Cage.
No, that was the thing that Alfonso had to compromise on. They couldn't get Nick for it.
Couldn't get Nick Cage. He had to settle for Clooney. Okay, well, let's talk about where this movie ranks. And again, like the way that this whole process worked was Alex, Cal, and I all made our favorite 100 movies of all time lists. Our producer Dan made his as well, and then he created some bananas algorithm that he refuses to explain to us to merge them all, and there's a weighting point system, and he created the top 100, but obviously there's a lot.
He
more.
alleges he uses math. He used math in some capacity, but frankly, I don't believe him.
No, I don't either.
He just overruled the ones he didn't like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He just kind of cobbled it together and said like, yeah, no, I did it in a spreadsheet, so there's math. And so this is another first for us, and it was a weird. This is me because it's not on my list, frankly. So this is me apologizing, I guess, for that. But it was. Watching, like I said earlier, like I saw the movie, I hadn't seen the movie in 10 years. Like I saw the movie twice in theaters. I distinctly remember seeing it and then being like, wait, not even the spacesuits were real? And then going back and watching it again. So it wasn't on mine. Guys, where was it on yours?
It didn't make the final cut, but it made the first draft. So when I had 175 films, it was on that. But by the time it got to 100, it unfortunately wasn't on mine either.
Alex?
Well, unless it's on Dan's list, I'm the lone lady floating in space. It is on my list. I regret to inform you, it is just barely. It is number 99. But I will say, I was supposed to say the number, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
It's funny because I remember I showed my list to my sister just to make sure I wasn't forgetting any major movies from our childhood. And the first thing she said was, God, you did love Gravity. Like, she specifically remembered that from 10 years ago, me not shutting up about Gravity. And now 10 years later, here I am, not shutting up about Gravity. No, but I love this movie. It's definitely on my list.
But that's the fun thing about doing this show, too, is like, I didn't rewatch every movie I've ever seen when I made the list. And so, like, running into, it's funny because I've run into movies that I didn't think about that, Cal or Alex or Dan had on the list that I'm like, oh man, that really should have been on my list. And then I've also run into movies that were on my list and I'm like, why did I put that on my list? And so it's been at some point we're going to need to revisit this. We're going to go on this crazy adventure and then add and subtract and rejigger. But anyway.
Well, no, and that's
I have this though, which is where it does exist on the list. But before I do that, Tim, I got one question for you. Since you're on our top 100 movie podcast of all time, can you give us a top 5? I know it's always hard to like say this is my singular favorite movie of all time, but at this moment in time, what are like a couple of films that you hold in extremely high regard?
I am so bad at picking lists of anything.
It's so
hard. The one I'll tell you is one that just always comes to mind, and I suspect if I watched it now, it wouldn't be as high as it is. But is Amadeus? Just when I saw it, I was blown away by it, and it moved me, and it was just incredible.
I've been talking a lot about that movie.
We're gonna end up talking about that on this show because it is very high on my list as well.
Yeah, it was a great movie.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's do this.
Oh wait, is this on Dan's list? Do we know, or is it just me?
I'm told no, it's not on Dan. I think it's just you. Yeah, you're
right.
the lone woman in space.
So not 100 right here. Okay, pop it open. Ooh, there's multiple. No, there's not multiple. There are multiple sheets in here. Let me just make sure that this is. You gotta read them in the right order. Yeah.
This is another thing, Tim. That these envelopes have gotten progressively more complicated. We've been gamifying this show as we go.
It's 270. 270 on the list.
So showing up on the tail end of Alex's list on the strength of that gets you 270.
I appreciate that we use 2 different colors to spell the name of this title.
That's nice.
I guess normally movies with more than one word in the title get each
Different
word is a different color,
so.
but yeah. Oh, I dig it.
Yeah, but I gotta say the thing about doing these lists is like I stand by pretty much every movie on my list so far, but it's like, man, that should be higher, man. And it's like, if you'll indulge me for a moment, filmmakers talk about the movies that made them want to make movies. This is one of the movies that made me think, oh, I want to talk about movies. Like, genuinely, this is my first movie that I kind of covered in the industry. So thank you, Tim. This feels like a full circle moment for me. And good job.
Well, I'm great. I'm
good
very
movie.
glad. I'm very glad.
Yeah, it's great, and that's one of the things that I love about doing this show is revisiting some of these movies and watching them with different eyes than the first time. But But thank you for being here, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. This was great. It was so much
pleasure.
fun talking about this movie. Like,
it's great talking about it and great chatting to you.
Yeah. And congrats again on 10 years of Gravity. Here's to 10 more.
Yeah.
I still can't wrap my head around it. I still don't know how you did it.
But that is, hopefully we never do. But that's all the time we got. So thank you again, Cal, Alex. Thanks for being here once again. Thank you to producer Tayo Yakin, our technical producer Mariah Franz, and Jamie Parslow for doing what he can to make us look good. And honestly, you know what? For more so than any other episode we've done so far, no thanks to Dan whatsoever. He's just made this whole process so much harder. A human bumping of the lamp. That's Dan Parkhurst is a human lamp bump. But if you also want to listen to this without actually watching us, we are available in all the places that you get your podcasts, so track us down over there. And we'll see you next time when we're going to be talking about another modern Marvel, technical filmmaking Marvel, Carol Reed's The Third Man. So we'll go back in time to watch a film noir next time. So we'll see you then. Tim, thanks again. And I really appreciate you now instilling the fear in me that if I'm watching a movie on the plane, the guy that made it might be judging me. That is a thing that never crossed my mind. But thanks again for being here. And stay safe and be good, everybody. We'll see you next time.